Stoicism and Nature of the Human Soul. This video explores the Stoic view of the human soul, emphasizing its characteristics of being corporeal, rational, and one. It delves into the implication of Stoic psychological monism for ethics, action, and emotion, as well as the periodization of Stoicism and its impact on the understanding of the soul. Additionally, it examines Brad Inwood's arguments regarding Stoic psychology and its relationship with the self, alongside a comparison of Seneca's views with those of Augustine. The Stoic view of the human soul. Stoicism presents a unique perspective on the human soul, characterized by three main attributes: corporeal, rational, and one. Corporeal. The Stoics consider the soul to be a body, albeit of a subtile nature, distinct from material bodies. This monistic view stands in contrast to the Platonic duality, which posits a separation between he soul and the body. Rational. According to Stoicism, the adult human soul is entirely rational. All operations of the soul involve the use of reason, and there is no irrational part that can conflict with rational thought. But the Stoic conception of the soul is that it is singular, without distinct parts or faculties. What we may label as irrational behaviors are merely manifestations of poor states within the reactive soul, rather than indications of a separate irrational part. Psychological monism and its implications. Stoic psychological monism carries significant implications for the theory of action, ethics, and emotions. If the soul is wholly rational, then motivational conflicts and irrational actions cannot be framed as a battle between reason and passion. Instead, irrationality should be viewed as an error in judgment or a failure of reason. Ethics. This understanding of the soul directly influences Stoics' ethics. If the soul is rational, then both virtue and vice hinge on how we utilize reason. Virtue is defined as acting in accordance with reason, while vice arises from succumbing to passion and desires. Periodization of Stoicism and psychological monism. The traditional division of Stoicism into three phases, early, middle, and late, raises questions about the continuity of psychological monism. Some scholars argue that figures like Paneatius and Posidonius introduced non-rational elements into the soul, while others contend that they remained true to the principles of psychological monism. Brad Inwood argument. In the book Psychology and the Essay, Brad Inwood examines the Stoic worldview regarding the soul and the theory of action. He discusses how the Stoics sought to establish a systematic psychology to replace the Platonic and Aristotelian framework, which has profound implication for Stoic ethics and action theory. Inwood posits that the Stoics lacked a clear conception of the self as distinct from the soul. However, their psychological framework still permitted a form of self-awareness and moral responsibility. He also analyzes Seneca's perspective on the soul and passion, noting that while Seneca adheres to the Stoic unified worldview, he emphasizes the phenomenology of emotional experience rather than a systematic psychological theory. Inwood compares Seneca's psychology with Augustine's notions of will and self. He concludes that, despite some similarities, the fundamental views of the two thinkers diverge significantly. In summary, Brad Inwood's exploration of Stoic philosophical highlights the unified worldview of the soul and its implications for action theory. The Stoic understanding of the self, its relationship to the soul, and Seneca's focus on emotional experience are critical to grasping the nuances of Stoic thought. Additionally, the comparison with Augustine enriches our understanding of the evolution psychological concepts in philosophy. Stoic ethics distinguishes between appropriate action, kathon, and right action, kartothomas. I's distinction is crucial to understanding the Stoic view of virtue and the role of indifference. Appropriate action is that which takes into account the indifferents, that is, things that are neither good nor bad in themselves, such as health, wealth, fame, etc. Both the fool and the wise can act appropriately by seeking the preferred indifference and avoiding the non-preferred indifference, that is, disease, poverty, etc. Right actions is that which is performed on the basis of wisdom and virtue. Only the wise can act correctly, for their actions is guided by reason and an understanding of good and evil. Seneca and appropriate action. Seneca repeatedly addresses the issue of appropriate action in his letters. He acknowledges that the indifferents have value, but warns his readers not to regard them as true goods. Seneca uses vivid examples and concrete situations to show how the pursuit of preferred indifference can lead to disappointment and unhappiness. He invites us to reflect on our choice and priorities, asking whether we are pursuing virtue or merely the indifference. The value of preferred indifference. It is important. They recognize that health, wealth, and fame can make life easier and allow the individual to devote himself to nobler pursuit. However, the Stoics emphasize that preferred indifference are not necessary for happiness. Virtue alone is sufficient to ensure a full and happy life. Right action, in turn, is the fruit of wisdom and virtue. The wise man, by acting correctly, demonstrates his understanding of the nature of good and evil and his ability to live according to reason. Right action is not only an external action but also an internal action. It involves perfect deliberation, consistency of soul, and the pursuit of self-improvement. In the history of philosophy, there is a tendency to devalue Roman thinkers like Seneca in comparison with their Greek predecessors. This view, influenced by Nietzschean and Hegelian interpretations, considers the Romans as mere imitators, without originality or relevance. Fortunately, this view has been revised by many scholars. They recognizes in Seneca an original and relevant author, who knew how to develop his own ideas and reflections. His philosophies speak directly to our modern yearning and concerns, inviting us to shape ourselves and our lives in virtuous way. Seneca identifies himself as a follower of Stoicism and refers to the Stoics in the first-person plural we. However, he is not a mere repeater of other people's ideas. His philosophy, although based on Stoicism, has its own voice and originality. It emphasizes the importance of philosophical practice, ethics, and self-knowledge, always seeking to connect theory to the practice of everyday life. His writhing, rich in examples and reflections, invites us to apply Stoic principles in our own lives, seeking wisdom and inner tranquility. Well, if you've made it this far, I hope you're enjoying the content, and I invite you to watch the video Seneca Political Context here on the channel. It deals with the relationship with Emperor Nero, virtue, and the transcendence of gender characteristics. An important aspect is the way Seneca relates virtue to the transcendence of gender characteristics. By consoling his mother and Marcia, he encourages them to overcome the weaknesses and patterns of behavior that are often associated with women. Seneca is not denying the particularities of female experiences, but rather encouraging his interlocutors to transcend stereotypes and rise above social expectations. He invites them to cultivate virtues as a path to personal fulfillment and to overcoming the limitations imposed by gender. The video highlights that the Stoic view of emotions is less implausible than one might think, especially when one takes into account the distinction between good feelings or rational reactions and proto-emotions. However, many scholars still defend an Aristotelian view of emotions, which values moderation and emotional balance. The central question is whether the Stoic advocate moderation or elimination of emotions. Seneca seems to advocate the elimination of emotions, arguing that the idea of moderate emotion is as absurd as the idea of moderate evil. The ideal agent and the rational response. Seneca argues that the ideal agent does not feel anger, but reacts justly and virtuously, seeking the common good rather than personal revenge. The ideal agent is therefore not passive or indifferent in the face of injustice. He acts not on the basis of irrational emotions such as anger, but rather on the basis of reason and virtue. The question is whether Seneca's consoling writings are an exception to his advocate of the elimination of emotions. Some scholars argue that Seneca's consolation recommend metriopathia, which means moderate affection rather than apatheia, which means elimination of suffering. However, other scholars argue that the consolations can be interpreted as progression from the goal of moderate suffering to the goal of elimination of suffering. Seneca's detailed analysis of anger is an example of how the Stoic claim that opinions develop. Seneca argues with the impression that he or she must take revenge. This analysis of anger as a mistaken judgment is central to the opinion. We can question and overcome it through reason and self-control. Anger as a mistaken judgment. And importance of consent. Seneca emphasizes that consent is a crucial element in the genesis of anger. The individual is not passive in the face of the impression of injustice, but rather acts actively by consenting to it and transforming it into anger. This emphasis on consent places the individual's responsibility for his or her emotions. We are not helpless victims of our passion, but rather agents who can choose how to respond to the impressions we receive. Stoic therapy of emotions and of anger is based on the idea that we can control our emotions through reason and self-control. By recognizing that anger is a mistaken judgment born of a feeling of being wronged, we can question this judgment and overcome it, as well as uncontrolled emotions. Emotions are not mere instinctive reactions, but complex responses involving our thoughts, beliefs, and values. By understanding the nature of emotions, we can learn to control them and direct them toward good.